There is a moment in almost every major criminal investigation when the pieces stop being separate and start forming a shape. This investigation has reached that moment. Nancy Guthrie has been missing from the Tucson, Arizona area since the first week of February 2026. Day 88 of the investigation brings a convergence of forensic, tactical, and intelligence developments that have not appeared together in this case before. Hair evidence recovered from inside her home, DNA processing of individuals with routine access to the property, a SWAT operation that removed a man and a woman from a residence, a detention near the Mexican border, an FBI suspect description released publicly, a $1 million family reward, and a forensic expert's public claim that the original scene was staged to mislead the people investigating it. Each of those elements matters on its own. Together, they constitute something different from what this investigation has presented publicly before. They constitute visible momentum. True crime analysis is not about chasing the loudest headline. It is about tracing the logic of an investigation, understanding what investigators are doing and why, and placing individual developments in the context of the whole. By that standard, what is happening in the Nancy Guthrie case right now demands careful attention. Because when investigators deploy tactical teams, process border detentions, and release official suspect descriptions within a compressed time frame, they are not reacting. They are executing a sequence. And sequences in criminal investigations tend to have ends. This analysis begins with the physical evidence, because that is where investigations begin and where they ultimately return. Everything else, the public statements, the theories, the reward announcements, the tactical operations, connects back to what the physical evidence supports. The hair found in her home, the biological material being compared against swabs taken from known individuals, the DNA profile that may or may not already be matched against a database entry. Understanding the logic of that physical evidence layer is the foundation for understanding everything else that is happening in this case right now. The investigation has been building toward this for a long time. The public is only now seeing how far it has come. The hair evidence is the forensic development that deserves the most careful analysis because it speaks directly to what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home before she disappeared. According to available reporting, FBI investigators have described hair recovered from inside her home as potentially critical. That specific language carries investigative meaning. Evidence is not typically characterized as potentially critical unless it presents a possibility of definitive identification that other evidence does not provide. Hair with an intact follicle, meaning the root is attached, contains nuclear DNA. Nuclear DNA provides a full genetic profile comparable to a fingerprint in terms of its capacity for definitive individual identification. Hair without the follicle carries mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited maternally and shared across a family line. Less specific, but still usable for comparison. The characterization of this hair is potentially critical, suggests one or both of two things. Either the hair includes material that can support nuclear DNA analysis, meaning it can potentially be matched to a specific individual, or its location within the home makes it forensically significant regardless of the DNA it carries. A hair found at a precise location, positioned in a way that suggests contact or struggle rather than casual shedding, tells a different story than a hair found in a common area. The simultaneous swabbing of hired home help for DNA comparison is the procedural step that makes sense immediately following a significant hair recovery. Before investigators can say that a piece of hair evidence came from someone who should not have been in the home, they need to eliminate everyone who had a legitimate reason to be there. Home cleaning staff, caretakers, maintenance workers, delivery personnel with access to the interior. All of these individuals would have routine explanations for leaving biological material in the home. Swabbing them is not suspicion, it is methodology. The process works like this. Every known individual with regular access to the home submits a DNA sample. Those samples are compared against any unidentified biological material recovered from the scene. When a sample does not match any known individual, what remains is what investigators need: an unidentified profile that represents someone who was not supposed to be there. If the hair recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home produces an unidentified profile after all known individuals have been eliminated, that profile becomes the most important piece of evidence in the case. The FBI suspect description released publicly connects directly to this forensic layer. According to available reporting, the FBI has now officially described a masked individual seen at the home. The description, drawn from footage analysis, gives the public specific physical characteristics to consider. The family's statement that they do not recognize this individual is important. It means the masked figure does not match anyone with an obvious connection to the household based on build, movement, or other identifiable characteristics visible through a mask. That combination, a physical description from official footage analysis and a family statement of non-recognition, points investigators towards someone outside the immediate household circle. The SWAT operation and the border detention represent the investigative action layer of this case, and both deserve close examination. SWAT deployments in the context of missing persons investigations are carefully calculated decisions. Law enforcement agencies do not dedicate specialized tactical units to operations without meeting a defined threshold of justification. That threshold typically involves one or more of the following: a credible belief that evidence at the location will be destroyed if a standard warrant is served; a credible assessment that individuals at the location are armed and present a safety risk to standard enforcement personnel; time-sensitive intelligence suggesting that a person of interest or a victim may be at the location; or a combination of factors that make tactical entry operationally necessary. The decision to conduct a SWAT raid on a property in connection with the Nancy Guthrie search tells us that investigators reached one or more of those thresholds. A man and a woman were removed from the property during the operation, according to available reporting. Whether either or both of those individuals are connected to the investigation in an evidentiary or suspect capacity, and whether the operation produced what investigators were looking for, are not confirmed in available public reporting. What is confirmed is that the operation was conducted and that it involved a residential property. In a case where investigators have been working methodically for 88 days, a tactical operation at this stage represents the application of a significant investigative resource to a specific target. That specificity matters. Investigators do not conduct SWAT operations on speculative locations. They conduct them on locations that the evidence has pointed them toward. The detention near the Mexican border introduces a geographic dimension that changes the scope of the investigation in ways that have not previously been public. According to available reporting, a man was detained in proximity to the border in connection with the search for Nancy Guthrie. His mother-in-law has publicly stated that he is innocent. The geographic significance of a border-proximate detention cannot be overstated in the context of a kidnapping investigation. If investigators have reason to believe that Nancy Guthrie or evidence connected to her disappearance may have been moved toward or across the border, the investigation shifts from a domestic missing persons case to a potential international dimension. That shift involves different federal authorities, different jurisdictional frameworks, and different investigative tools. It also introduces a motivational category that has not been prominent in prior coverage: a kidnapping carried out with the intention of moving the victim across the border. This category of case exists. It is typically organized, planned, and executed by individuals with knowledge of cross-border logistics. If the evidence supports this category, it changes the suspect profile significantly. The theory that the abduction may have been motivated by a grievance against Savannah Guthrie's public profile also gains additional resonance in this context. A planned operation carried out by individuals outside the family's recognition, potentially involving cross-border logistics, is more consistent with a targeted operation than a crime of opportunity. Savannah Guthrie's publicly reported emotional response, the weight she is carrying around the possibility that her visibility contributed to what happened to her mother, is not something that any investigation can address. But it is a human reality that sits alongside all of the forensic and tactical analysis. The staged crime scene theory demands the most analytical rigor of everything that has emerged in this case, because it is the claim that most fundamentally reframes the investigation's starting point. A forensic psychologist has publicly argued, according to available reporting, that the crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home bears characteristics consistent with deliberate staging. The specific claim includes the suggestion that she may have been killed elsewhere and that the scene was prepared to create a false impression of what happened at the home. Understanding what a staged crime scene involves is necessary before evaluating this claim. Scene staging occurs when someone with access to a location deliberately alters what is present, what is missing, and how things are arranged in order to mislead investigators about the nature or location of a crime. Staging requires several preconditions. The person doing the staging must have access to the location. They must have time to make the alterations. They must have some knowledge of how investigators read scenes, at least enough knowledge to attempt misdirection, and they must have a reason to obscure what actually happened. The evidentiary characteristics that forensic analysts use to identify staging include inconsistencies between the scene's apparent narrative and the physical reality of what the evidence shows. A staged abduction might show signs of a struggle in locations where the physical evidence does not support a struggle having occurred there. Furniture positioned in ways that look disrupted but do not match the biomechanics of how a real struggle unfolds. Objects selected for removal that someone staging a scene would think investigators would notice, but that experienced forensic analysts recognize as selected rather than absent organically. If the forensic psychologist's analysis reflects these kinds of specific inconsistencies, it points towards someone with intimate knowledge of the home and sufficient time to prepare a false scene. That combination narrows the suspect field in a specific way. What makes this theory particularly significant in the context of the other developments is its alignment with the border detention. If the scene was staged and if someone was detained near the border in connection with the investigation, the two developments might represent the beginning and the end of a single investigative line. A staged departure scene, followed by an attempt to leave the jurisdiction. That connection is speculative from available information. It has not been confirmed by investigators. But the investigative logic of placing those two developments alongside each other is not unreasonable. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has issued a new message, and the department's past controversy has also resurfaced in reporting. According to available information, unspecified past issues involving Sheriff Chris Nanos have been raised again in the context of the current investigation. Whether those issues have any direct bearing on the conduct of this investigation or its current direction is not possible to assess from available reporting. What their resurfacing represents is the continued public scrutiny of every institutional actor connected to this case. This moment in the investigation, with its convergence of forensic discoveries, tactical operations, federal releases, and expert analysis, is the point where serious subscribers to this case need to be paying the closest attention. If you are not already following this analysis, this is the time to stay connected so you do not miss what comes next. What the Nancy Guthrie investigation looks like at day 88 is different from what it looked like at day 50 or day 70 or even a week ago. The difference is not simply the accumulation of new headlines. It is the emergence of a coherent investigative picture from what had previously appeared to be disconnected threads. Hair evidence in a specific location, DNA of known individuals being systematically eliminated, a masked figure caught on footage at the home, a tactical operation at a connected property, a detention near a border, a formal suspect description issued by the FBI, a reward increased to a level that generates national attention. These elements do not exist in isolation. They exist in relationship to each other, and understanding that relationship is what allows an analytical framework to emerge. The relationship looks like this. Investigators have physical evidence from the home that may identify an individual. They are eliminating known individuals to isolate an unidentified profile. They have footage of a masked individual whose identity the family cannot confirm. They have conducted a tactical operation on a related location. They have pursued a lead that extends toward the border. They have released information publicly that invites tips from individuals who may have seen or know something about the masked suspect. That is the architecture of an investigation closing around a target. Whether the target has been definitively identified in the current evidence is not something that can be confirmed from available public reporting. But the shape of the investigation is the shape of one that has moved from the stage of open-ended inquiry to the stage of focused pursuit. The staged scene theory, if it holds, provides an explanation for why the early stages of this investigation appeared to generate more confusion than clarity. If the scene was deliberately prepared to mislead investigators, the early investigative work would have been oriented toward a false starting point. The reorientation driven by forensic analysis that identified inconsistencies between the scene and the physical reality would explain why the investigation appears to have shifted significantly in recent weeks. Former FBI analysis of this case has suggested that new evidence has the potential to significantly shift the public understanding of what happened. That framing from analysts who have followed investigations to their conclusions is consistent with a case that has more evidence that it has yet shared and is approaching the moment when that evidence becomes actionable. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. That is the fact around which everything else in this analysis orbits. Her family has committed $1 million to finding her. Her daughter has publicly expressed a grief and a guilt that no one in her position should have to carry alone. Her neighbors are afraid in ways that extend beyond concern for a specific person to a generalized fear about safety in their community. The investigation owes all of them the truth, not the impression of momentum, not the performance of activity, the actual truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, where she is, and who is responsible. The evidence suggests that truth is closer than it has ever been. Whether it will arrive in days or in months is not something that can be confirmed from what is publicly available. What can be confirmed is that the investigation has been building toward it for 88 days, and that the building has accelerated in ways that were not visible until now. The process of working with hair evidence in a case of this complexity requires a detailed understanding of what forensic laboratories actually do with it, because the characterization of evidence as potentially critical only becomes meaningful when you understand the methodology behind that characterization. When FBI forensic scientists receive hair evidence from a crime scene, the first step is physical microscopic examination. This examination looks at the structural characteristics of the hair shaft, its diameter, its medullary pattern, the scale pattern of its cuticle, and any visible characteristics of its pigmentation. Different individuals produce hair with different structural profiles, and physical microscopy can establish whether a given hair is consistent with having come from a specific individual, though it cannot by itself provide a definitive match. The second step, and the one that carries the most evidentiary weight, is DNA analysis. This step determines what type of DNA is available for analysis based on the condition of the hair. Follicular material, if present, permits nuclear DNA profiling. The absence of follicular material limits analysis to mitochondrial DNA, which, as noted earlier, is shared by maternal relatives rather than being individually unique. The third step is comparison. The forensic scientist compares the DNA profile extracted from the evidence hair against a reference database and against any reference profile submitted by individuals connected to the case. When the profile from the evidence hair does not match any reference profile in the database or among submitted samples, the result is the most valuable finding an investigation can hope for: an unidentified profile that represents someone who has not yet been placed in the investigative record. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the systematic swabbing of home help creates the reference database for this comparison. Every person swabbed contributes a reference profile. Every reference profile that does not match the evidence hair narrows the field. When the elimination process is complete and unmatched evidence remains, what the investigation has is a biological record of presence that cannot be explained by any known visitor. That record is what investigators mean when they describe evidence as potentially critical. It has the potential to identify definitively and by objective biological comparison an individual whose presence at the scene cannot be otherwise explained. The public statement from a bandmate of Tommaso Cioni, Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, contains information that is easy to read as personal grievance, but that carries broader analytical significance. According to available reporting, this individual described the experience of having his home surrounded when accusations were directed towards someone in his social circle. The account, as reported, describes a mob response to unconfirmed suspicion that produced real and immediate consequences for people with no established connection to what happened to Nancy Guthrie. This testimony functions as an on-the-ground account of what happens when public suspicion, amplified by social media and high-visibility coverage, detaches from confirmed investigative information. People with peripheral connections to individuals under suspicion find themselves the subjects of community action that law enforcement cannot always intervene in because the action, however intimidating, does not necessarily rise to a criminal threshold. In true crime analysis, the practical significance of this testimony is its reminder that the space between public suspicion and legal accountability is real and carries human costs. An accusation does not require legal grounding to produce consequences. A name that circulates widely enough in connection with a crime, even without official confirmation, generates a response in communities and social networks that operates outside the investigative and judicial processes designed to establish truth. The bandmate's testimony does not establish anything about Tommaso Cioni's innocence or guilt. It establishes something about the experience of being in proximity to someone who has been publicly accused. And it is a reminder that the standards appropriate to serious analysis of this case, the insistence on distinguishing between what is confirmed and what is suspected, carry real meaning for real people. The convergence of two separate reward announcements in the Nancy Guthrie case creates an informational environment that investigators must navigate carefully. The FBI's increase of its reward to $100,000 represents federal policy and federal resources applied to a specific investigative objective: generating new information from the public. Federal reward announcements carry institutional credibility. They are backed by the full weight of the federal investigative apparatus. People who respond to federal reward announcements know that the agency offering the reward has both the resources to pay it and the investigative capacity to verify claims and process information appropriately. The Guthrie family's $1 million announcement operates in a different register. It carries the emotional weight of a family that has spent 3 months not knowing what happened to their mother and grandmother. And it makes a statement about the value of her life and her return that no institutional announcement can replicate. $1 million from a family is a different kind of statement than $100,000 from an agency. It is personal, it is committed, and it communicates that the family has not resigned itself to waiting. The investigative challenge with dual high-reward announcements is the tip volume they generate. When two major rewards are announced in connection with the same case within a short period, the resulting influx of public tips can be substantial. Each tip requires human review. Each piece of potentially relevant information requires assessment against what investigators already know. Each caller who believes they have seen the masked suspect described by the FBI deserves a response. Managing this influx while maintaining the integrity of the active investigative threads, including the SWAT operations outcomes, the border detentions yield, and the DNA processing of the home help swabs, requires investigative infrastructure that the FBI's involvement provides. Local law enforcement alone would struggle to process the tip volume this case is now generating. The federal partnership provides the capacity to do both simultaneously. What the public tips produce in terms of actionable new leads depends entirely on what people know and whether the FBI suspect description is specific enough to trigger genuine recognition in someone who has seen the masked individual in a different context. Descriptions of masked individuals are by definition limited. Height, build, gait, and the specific characteristics visible through a mask are what investigators have to work with. Those characteristics, released to the public, can still generate recognition in people who observe the suspect in an unmasked context because they connect a physical profile to a person someone may know. That connection is what investigators are counting on, and $1 million creates a significant incentive to make it. The case is not over, but it is not where it was.